So, hi everyone. This is Diana Sinton with UCGIS and I-GUIDE, and I'm here to lead this info session with my colleague Eric Schuck. And we're going to be talking about the Community Champions program that's available to people affiliated with I-GUIDE member institutions as part of I-GUIDE's, with UCGIS member institutions as part of I-GUIDE's outreach activity. So maybe we could just go around super quickly and just check in to see who else is here. Alex, you're to the right of my screen.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alex Michaels. I'm an assistant professor in GIS at the University of Texas at Dallas.
All right. Emma or Saragai?
Hi, my name is Emma. I'm a PhD student at the University of Chicago in the Data Science Institute.
Hi, my name is Sarge. I am an academic coordinator at the Spatial Center of UCSB.
At UCSB. Okay,
Yeah.
Super. Well, let me tell you all a little bit about this Community Champions program overall. And Eric has put the link into the chat already. I'll share my screen so I can just point out a few things about this. Eric, I kind of rushed over an introduction of you. Do you want to do any more introduction of yourself?
No, I guess I'm Eric Schuck. I'm an associate professor at the University of Minnesota, and I am co-lead of education and workforce development for I-GUIDE. So that's the role that I play here.
All right. And Eric is also a longtime contributor to UCGIS activities as well. So the Community Champions program started when I-GUIDE started its funding 5 years ago, 2021, 4 years ago. We're in our 5th year right now, just started it. And this was created as an opportunity for I-GUIDE to extend its outreach a little bit. UCGIS is one of the partners of I-GUIDE, and we have a subaward from them. And this is the subaward that supports my involvement with I-GUIDE because I'm a senior research fellow with UCGIS. And the idea with each one of these programs, we started with a 2021-22 cohort where we would have people affiliated with UCGIS member institutions, 2 or 3 people each year, or actually, I think even one year we've had 4, 2 to 4 people each year who would work on a project during that year in which it was a small scale project. It's meant to be kind of like a small, narrow, small scope activity that was aligned with the type of work that UCGIS, the I-GUIDE was already doing that year. The first 3 cohorts focus specifically on things related to our convergence curriculum materials, which is educational materials that Eric Schuck has led the development of, and related up ultimately to GeoAI and things around convergent science. Last year, we had a cohort of individuals, I think we had 4 people last year, who specifically were already working in the area of AI, and they created materials around with some AI applications that they were already doing, and they used those with our contributed those to our I-GUIDE platform, which is the platform that supports the type of computing that that I-GUIDE aims to do. And the Convergence curriculum also leverages the platform. This year, what we wanted to do is return a little bit to the idea of working with the curriculum, but also do some work with AI. And Eric had an idea for how that might work. Eric, I don't know if you want me to keep sharing this or we can talk about it. Everyone has the link. I can I can stop sharing so we can see each other's,
Yeah, I think you can keep going with sharing just for the intro, and
Okay,
then we can stop sharing, and then see everyone.
okay. So the general idea that Eric and I and others at I-GUIDE came up with was that we know that there are people out there in some kind of instructional role working at a UCGIS member institution that maybe already have a lot of AI expertise, but are looking for a way to create or refine a particular lab activity. Or maybe it's people who just want to get started in it and add some type of AI involved activity to their teaching, like maybe, again, just one single lab activity. This is a small scale project. There is a stipend available for people eligible to receive one of $3,000. So it's not a huge amount of money. It's not an award. It doesn't go through your university sponsored research office. It's just ultimately a check that is made payable to the participants directly. But it's a little bit of an honorarium received for doing these contributions. The idea is that there's a two-way exchange of information. The people participating get to create something with assistance from I-GUIDE, with support from I-GUIDE, maybe with some feedback, understanding how a particular activity might work with the platform behind it. And then you would work on these materials, develop them again with some support from I-GUIDE, use them in a class, get feedback from students, and then be able to share about that overall instructional experience back with the broader community by, for example, giving a VCO, one of our virtual consulting offices, sometime in the spring. So we sorted out kind of a general timeline for how this might work, and we think that it'd be interesting to have the group working together, the group selected to do this year, work a little bit together because people can learn from each other. So during, the deadline that we have at this point set up is to apply by October 31st. During the month of November, you would kind of look through the types of things we have existing already in the Convergence curriculum. Maybe there would be a kickoff session for the people selected to be able to just share some ideas and talk to each other. We would facilitate that. The general idea is that in the winter, November through January, you would start to use a template for a lab that Eric and others here at I-GUIDE would be forming that and contributing that. That you start experimenting with it sometime, maybe try something with a few students in January and February, maybe March and April, actually run a lab activity in class. We kept these months slightly vague because everyone's going to be on a slightly different schedule, and it's not as if everyone's going to be doing this exactly the same week. And then ultimately by next summer, the materials that you create would be uploaded as one of our educational resources on the platform. And then there would be an opportunity to share your final work back with just lessons learned, how the experience was, back with the educational community that UCGIS and I-GUIDE work with a lot, higher education, people looking at geospatial AI questions. So that's the way we're envisioning that this year would work. It is our final cohort. I-GUIDE wraps up its funding in September 2026, just a year from now. So this would be the final cohort, and we are looking for ways to, again, the purpose, the driving motivation for this is that by developing things on a small scale, we can also share them more widely and have the broader community more familiar with I-GUIDE and the platform and the resources that it provides. So that's a general overview about this. I'll stop sharing now, and the purpose of this info session is for us to lay out these general details and to answer any questions that you may have at this point. That application form is pretty straightforward. It asks you for an idea of what you might want to do. It prompts you for some questions about maybe the size of the data or the nature of the models that you might want to use. And if you don't know some answers for that yet, that would be okay to say, I'm not sure yet. So because as we look through the applications, we'd be able to get an understanding of whether the proposed idea is something that fit well and that I-GUIDE would be in a good position to help support. So you don't have to have all the details finalized in the application. What questions might you have?
Yeah, thank you so much for the information. So based on my understanding, it's gonna be like an online class format, or it's more like for in-person lab?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think we had, we haven't specified it one way or another. I think it would be really interesting in either situation. Different things would come up. Yeah, I don't think neither Eric nor I had envisioned that it would be only one thing or another. Eric, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Diana is correct that we don't have any limitations in terms of whether you would want to design it specifically for online or specifically in person. So I think either or both are fine. One kind of stipulation with the Community Champions program is that if you're developing kind of notebooks and kind of the GeoAI kind of hands-on piece, that it does use the I-GUIDE platform. So the benefit of the I-GUIDE platform is that it has the resources, the data, and everything else for students, and you don't have to have powerful desktop machines if you're in an in-person lab, or especially if you're online and students have their own laptops. Laptops tend not to be very powerful when purchased by students, or at least when I was a student, I wasn't able to afford a great laptop. So it makes it a little bit more accessible for everyone as well. So it's not just, you know, a few select students have powerful enough computers to be able to do some of the lab activities. So so that makes it kind of equal and accessible for everyone, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Also, I guess when I think through the logistics of it, ultimately the materials themselves again become one of our open educational resources. So it would, you know, you might do a version in your class itself that through the nature of the class, students were accessing something or doing something that might be through your own university's learning management system, but whatever was ultimately submitted to the platform would have to be a version of that really was didn't have campus restrictions, didn't have, you know, something that would let people proceed through the activity, or, you know, maybe modify it for their own campus, but it would be something that would have to be modifiable for different campuses. And then the platform itself, most people in university situations have access to the platform through CI logon, but that would be something else you'd want to check out first. If you're completely unfamiliar with the I-GUIDE platform, you'd want to look at it and, you know, log on to it and see the different types of, you know, take a look at some of the notebooks that are already there, the resources that might have already been listed, because involving the platform is going to be a requirement of the activity.
Okay, thank you. I think I have another question. So for the curriculum or the class we're developing, is it for like what level? For beginners who don't know GeoAI, or it's for grad students, or it should be a easier level or advanced level class in general?
Eric, do you want to respond to that one?
You want it to be nearly impossible for everyone. No, I'm just kidding. We actually do not have any stipulations in the application materials. Ultimately, what would be great with the cohort is that we have at least a little bit of overlap so that it's valuable for everyone who's a community champion in our final year to get benefit from the conversations. Because obviously, if everyone's working on things that are completely different, it's really hard to get benefit and kind of shared experience. That being said, hopefully we don't have 100% overlap either, because if everybody's doing the same thing, then we don't have good coverage. So I tend to think that more toward the beginner tends to be usually where people like to start, unless if you or your campus or your current curriculum already has a lot of existing GeoAI related materials. Most people have to start somewhere toward the beginning. Now, I always have to caveat that because a lot of times, us university folks like to think that graduate level is advanced and undergraduate level is not advanced. But when you're learning new techniques, technologies, approaches, theories, etc., that isn't always, that doesn't necessarily always hold true. So we don't feel like you have to target, this is exclusively for PhD students, right? So don't feel like we are really trying to break apart based off of grad undergrad. Now, of course, we tend to assume that graduate students have a certain level of training, but that doesn't always apply to GeoAI. Usually that would apply to the more traditional ways that people are trained and educated. And one of the reasons why we're doing the community champions cohort this way is that we're assuming that there's a big group of not only learners, but instructors who would like to introduce these curricula or these topics into their own curriculum, even if you don't already have it. So however you feel like would benefit your kind of students, your curriculum, wherever that is probably the best place to start. I would say anyone who's kind of either listening live or to the recording, be open to, pivots and new ideas. We're really hoping to have a little bit of a community of the community champions so that we can share ideas. Some of us from I-GUIDE will be available to kind of like help the process. Answer questions, maybe debug some problems, those sorts of things. So, what you propose may not be what you actually kind of develop and deliver, but hopefully it's a better version of whatever it is. This is my long answer.
Thank you. I have another question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. Yeah.
Okay, so in our spatial center, we have been developing a modern GIS curriculum. So it's a partnership with Esri. So we use a lot of Esri's, ArcPro or their resources. So for this project, is that something we can do, or we should do more like open source?
Well, important question. The things, I'm not going to say that some part of it can't be connected to Esri software, but I think that again, ultimately it needs to be accessible to the broad educational community. So, and the platform itself is an open source platform that relies on open source tools and applications. So I don't know, but I know that there are also some important bridges out there that we ought to be able to leverage and to model the use of. So that's where I'll leave my comments, and let's see what Eric says about.
Yeah. I mean, inside the project, we've talked about that a little bit. Minnesota, we just hired kind of a new kind of lecturer instructor position to help with our GI science program. And him and I were talking about this with I-GUIDE because he was helping develop and think through some curriculum material of taking kind of traditional GI science curriculum and integrating it with and trying to think through how you would integrate it with the I-GUIDE platform. So I definitely don't want to say no, because there are ways that you can go from an equivalent of Arc Pro over to kind of a Jupyter instance, or be able to run on external resources using things like APIs and other techniques. That said, I'll give the same answer that I give to students in my Principles of Geocomputing and my Advanced Geocomputing classes, which is to say that if the lab activity or the final submission opens up in Arc Pro, runs in Arc Pro, and creates a map, that will not meet the specification of what we're asking for, which is a little bit more of the traditional approach. One of the reasons why we're developing these curriculum materials in the first place is to actually help the GIS community go outside of that box, to get off of the desktop, and to be able to use these larger computational resources. But it recognizes that, you know, people still use those resources as part of their profession. So, so if you have ideas or want to experiment with how can you kind of bridge, let's say something like Arc Pro or Arc Online or some level of enterprise, and it doesn't have to be Esri either. I'm using that as the example because they're the 800-pound gorilla and the de facto commercial standard for GIS. But if you have other commercial tools that you're thinking about that you use quite heavily in your curriculum, especially with the modern GIS curriculum, I am also associated with that project. I sit on the advisory board for that. So, so I, you know, if we can find some bridges like what Diana said, that would be, you know, amazing. So I don't think that we're saying no, but it can't just be a notebook that runs within Esri's kind of Jupyter ecosystem, if that makes sense for scoping. It's always this weird gray area because nobody knows exactly where the edges and the boundaries always shift depending on the technology and everything else.
That makes sense. Thank you so much.
Right.
I have a couple questions. First, I was wondering, are you all specifically looking for main instructors of courses to do this work, or could someone in more of a TA or co-teaching kind of position develop this type of curriculum activity as well?
That's a good question. We did have in an earlier cohort, we did have a PhD student participate who was kind of late stage PhD and was finishing up and going on to do more teaching. So we don't have a categorical exclusion against you know, a later stage graduate student working on things. There's no restriction against that. But I think in the application, we'd want to understand that this person applying would be in a position to be able to test, you know, to develop and test the material, and provide that get that student feedback. So yeah, so I mean, every situation might be a little different on your campus, but if you were the, you know, maybe you're the lead instructor, maybe you're the lead TA, maybe you have your own section as a TA, you know, it might vary. So I definitely wouldn't say absolutely not, but you would want to be a person that has some direct connection with the classroom.
So if there was an agreement that the activity I develop, I could have one class dedicated to it as a TA, in a TA role for the classroom, and I had agreement with the main professor of the class, then like I could potentially do this.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can confirm that with the next level up at iGuide, but I'm pretty certain that there wouldn't be a in any way a conflict of interest. We would just want to know that there was, you know, maybe within the application, an additional reference to the person with whom you would be coordinating to make that happen.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, this is an excellent question, and one that I admittedly was not prepared for. So we would have to go and talk to people in kind of the executive committee, potentially PI of iGuide, about this. But another approach in it like having some flexibility so that you could run like this exercise as part of a class, even as a TA, like that's fine. Mostly we want the curriculum to be kind of at least one round of like field tested so that you can get feedback from students who are learning and then revise based off of that feedback, because otherwise it's kind of just, you make a notebook and we throw it out there saying that it's curriculum material, but it's, never actually been tried. And then everyone who adopts it is kind of the first, trial subjects of using it. And if they hit some issues, it's not always great. And yeah, a lot of times, like, I actually give my TAs opportunity to develop their own lab that they run along with like a lecture so that they get that experience. So if that's an opportunity that's available to you, that would be great. The other option that I'm going to toss out there that we'll have to get confirmation that is true would be if you're willing to do a non-traditional online training as part of the Community Champions Fellows program. So in that case, it would not be in a traditional class. You just maybe do, there's a variety of different names for it, but some people call these like lunch and learn. So like maybe for 3 Fridays in a row at noon, whatever your time zone is, you host a Zoom session kind of like this, and you kind of go through and we try to recruit a group of learners who could be students, could be faculty that just want to learn what you're doing, with the agreement that we get some feedback, we kind of see the experience, and you're willing to make the same changes that you would have made after feedback from students going through a class. Okay. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah. So feel free to follow up. I would say it's a really good question, and there's potentially other individuals who might be applying with a similar question. So we'll try to get clarification for you.
Yeah, we'll make sure.
And others. Yeah.
We'll check in and make sure that we're not making some promises we might have to claw back later.
Yeah, and I don't want you to apply to be dinged on the application in ways that we didn't communicate. That's not, that's a waste of your time and our time, which is not great. But at the same time, I don't want to turn anyone down if they have good ideas and are willing to try stuff. That's kind of what this program's all about.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. And then the other question I had is on the actual iGuide platform. I see that like when you're in the discovery setting or looking for different things, one of the topics is educational resource, or like one of the tags. But then like I've looked up some of the past community champions participants, and their topics aren't listed under educational resources. They're more like one I'm looking at right now is just listed as a notebook. Anyway, I was just wondering if within the actual platform, the work we do or the activity we develop through this, would it it could just kind of classify within the notebook type section, or is it kind of meant to be more structured like some of the educational resource things
Yeah.
already there?
Yeah, the first 3 years of the program, it was definitely curriculum oriented. And if those materials made it into the platform, the platforms have been evolving too, then they would have probably been tagged. Well, it could have, there might have actually been resources that were not notebooks. Last year, there was no specific curricular focus, so those things probably just got tagged as notebooks. Going forward, I imagine now that we have a more robust system of tags, that we would have things, tagged in both ways. If something happened to be a notebook, but also happened to have been designed as within an instructional context, then it would be tagged under both items, under both categories.
Yeah, and I'll take ownership of that I did not go through and double check that all of the notebooks that should be educational materials were tagged. So that actually is on me. Especially if this is something, at least if I was advising kind of a graduate student, you were selected for this opportunity, I would encourage you to make sure that it was listed under educational materials so that you can put that on your CV resume when you're applying for positions. So if that's actually something, we can ensure that your materials would be classified under the educational box. So that's just a lapse on my side. So.
Okay. Yeah, I was just more asking as a way of getting a better idea of what like the product of this program should look like, or the format it should take. But
yeah, I think in the early years, like cohort 1, well, no, I mean, everything was really different. I don't think I'm going to find one example. I think there was somebody from cohort 2 that probably has things that became part of the convergence curriculum.
Yeah.
And take a look at those, the ones from cohort 2.
Okay.
Zainab's and Shaquille's really were designed to feed into the convergence curriculum. Not that these would have had necessarily, some of them had GeoAI, but and don't get confused by last year's cohort, because then these all happen to be instructors, like they all happen to be faculty, but it was really about research activities that they were presenting.
Yeah, now you'll get a little bit of a history lesson, but the curriculum didn't exist in year 1, and
Right.
it was being designed in year 2. So there, some of them were never classified for the curriculum because it quite literally didn't exist. But your question actually raises an important point that we actually should go back and reclassify. That was honestly something that was never on the radar. But we're going to have a committee meeting maybe tomorrow, I think. So maybe I'll bring that up as an action item. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to clarify because some of them they have the slides and then the kind of module separately versus the notebooks are kind of a notebook like with the code and explanations throughout, and those are just like different kind of formats, I guess. But
yeah, and we will work with the community champions. We actually have a template and an explainer doc that explains that there's actually a structure to those slides. There's a structure to the curriculum material itself, so that there's at least some level of consistency across the board. So community champions, we would share that information, and actually it's available somewhere online at one point at least, but we should probably make that a little bit more explicit. So we would work with you. It wouldn't be that we would just say like do it right, but we wouldn't explain to you what we're looking for.
Okay, sounds good. And just one other question, if it's okay. You mentioned that it would be ideal if the people part of the cohort were working on like somewhat similar things, but not too similar. When you say like, when you say that, are you kind of referring to like how some of these projects are about like related to urban issues and like food insecurity? Like, is that the type of topic you all would, not that it has to be an urban issue of food insecurity, but is it kind of the application that you're hoping will be somewhat similar between us? Or is it the actual like methodology that you would hope would be somewhat similar?
Yeah, that's another good question. So mostly when I say some level of similarity, that you aren't kind of talking across whoever the selected champions are, that you're not talking to each other, and one, two, or all of you are kind of like, this has, what we're talking about has nothing to do with what I'm working on. Now, what ends up happening a lot of the time is that there are almost always areas of overlap, which could just be structuring your materials, which could be, what level are you explaining? How broad of an audience are you using to introduce these materials? Because there's, at least in geospatial, there tends to be a challenge of bringing usually pretty interdisciplinary perspectives down to a geospatial problem. And then that problem, might be urban, might be agriculture, might be anything else, but kind of that funneling process, it tends to be kind of a similar shared challenge with instructors. Similarly, how you go from the technology to the topic, even if the topic changes, that is another equal shared experience. So usually in those sorts of instructional discussions, you'll get almost the same complaint from the instructor saying like, oh, I'm really struggling with this. And if you just replace, urbanization something with agricultural crop something, if you just swap those words around, like everything else is identical. So it tends to be the case that there are kind of shared challenges. I'm always careful with absolutes, but I don't think I've ever had the case where there's 100% overlap, because there's just too many differences.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
But
yeah, so I would say propose what you want.
Yeah.
Right? Like don't, I would strongly push back against trying to write something that you think we want to read, because
Right.
actually what we really want is what you want to do.
Right.
And help you do that. And then the only trick is if what you want to do does align with I-GUIDE. But if you're on this call, it's got to be at least 80%, I would imagine. Otherwise you wouldn't have signed up.
What I would say in as an extension of what Eric just said is apply with what you want to do. And then when the reviewers look at all of it, we will probably see some connections that exist. Maybe it's because of different ways or similar ways that foundation models are being considered, or something that I think it'll be part of our review process to find some complementary areas of interesting projects. So that we will be able to see that there will be people that could learn from each other when they are working on some side-by-side things. So don't try to anticipate what we would want, just apply with what you want to do. And I think that the people looking at the collective set of applications will be looking for some things that make sense, that makes some so that some synergies can come out of the activities ultimately, and help you all to help with your building your networks too. So it's not just a standalone thing in a vacuum that you did one semester.
Okay, gotcha. And if just one other thing, another question. Is the kind of idea of developing the specific activity or lesson, like, sometimes you can give a specific data set and you learn some methods by looking at that data set, but the students themselves aren't given the opportunity to say, oh, like, I'd rather look at this topic versus this topic, even if data sets are structured similarly. Like, would the design of this type of curriculum be more like we want everyone to use the same data set, and like they learn a very specific methods based on that data set, or is there a desire to have more flexibility in the type of data, the different applications people could use the methods you're explaining through the lesson on? Like, if you're in an actual classroom, would the goal be to give the students the opportunity to choose, oh, like, I want to look at this state versus this state, this measure versus that measure, and to create a lesson that can be applied to different data sets? I don't know if that question makes sense, but
No, I think we hear what you're saying. And my first reaction is that it's going to depend. Ultimately, this needs to be something that can be shared broadly, something that's totally specific. So this thing it is helpful when there is the opportunity for other faculty or other students to swap them things out. Like, this uses a particular data set that happens to come from Columbus, Ohio, but a very similar data set could come from other cities. I mean, that situation might exist, and it increases the utility for it. But you still have to, you can't, like, there's a balance too between being able to have data that are formatted in similar ways. Like, you don't want the lesson to be unusable by others until they would do some complicated reformatting of all of the data to use it. So like Eric was describing, where you're looking at a particular thing and you were able to swap out agricultural data with whatever else he said, census data. But ultimately, the weeds, there are a lot of weeds around that you have to actually reconcile in an instructional setting. So
so if you were wanting
part
to
of it
define it,
depends. In the past, we have tried to make things that are completely swap one data set out for another data set, and sometimes that really works, and sometimes it's a challenge in an instructional setting.
okay.
Those are my observations on it. Eric?
Yeah, I think that I think I'll go back to saying maybe be prepared to pivot a little bit, kind of propose the project that you would want to do, that you would actually be interested and committed to. And sometimes there's aspects of those projects that have huge technical challenges that we can help you overcome. And sometimes, it'll have challenges in terms of data, or, like, it might just not be technically possible to do some things. And then we have to say, like, okay, we can't do it this way. Let's brainstorm some other ways to do it. But definitely your question, saying, do we have a specific method, or do we have a specific problem? No, this is that part's very open, I would say. And being able to make a hands-on activity where learners have the option to swap out, the study area, or say, rather than picking, path A for a methodology, we want to pick path B for a methodology, like fantastic. You know, that, you know, there can be a variety of challenges with that. Just in terms of like, you know, making that all work from an instructional standpoint. But if that's something that you feel like would be beneficial for a group of learners, like great, like let's let's hear it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for answering all my questions.
Yeah, no, it's great. Any other questions from anybody?
Alex has all the answers already.
Yeah.
No, I think you guys did a great job of explaining. The one thing I guess I would add on, educational resources versus notebook. So educational resources is just a markdown. You like can't really put a notebook in there versus a notebook is just like a link to a notebook. So just from my experience with platform, that's the difference. You can link them though. So
Yeah.
you have like an educational resource that is linked to a notebook.
Yep.
'Cause
And I
know-
think that that's probably what we would do for this cohort. Yeah. So every year the community champions, like what they do, like kind of who we try to recruit has kind of changed year to year. So we can't just say like go back and look at the last 3 years because each one's a touch different. But I do think that, yeah, for this cohort of community champions, we would make a page for each one under educational resources that would point to notebooks or data or other pieces that might also be on the platform. Because yeah, like especially if, to Emma's question, if you're bringing in a problem with potentially your own data or something like that, we would also put that on the platform so that other people can use it to go through your particular kind of exercise.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned this is the last year of the funding for I-GUIDE or for this specifically. Even when the funding ends, will this website still be fully supported and these resources will like be maintained over time?
Yeah, the University of Illinois has pledged the support for the types of things that Xiaowen Wang is overseeing, like the platform, to continue. It doesn't, like, I can't promise 10 years from now there might be a different flavor or version of this, but definitely within the next few years, even though and there's I-GUIDE is always, you know, people are looking for other sources of money that could continue things and extend it in other ways too.
Okay.
Yeah, your materials won't disappear
Yeah.
in 1 year.
So we'll have, we're looking to see if people could apply by the end of October so that we can turn around and review things pretty quickly within a couple of weeks and get back to people within the first half of November, and then go from there. Like try to get a time, definitely before Thanksgiving time, when who's ever selected would be able to have a first online meeting and just meet each other and talk about their plans and go along from there. So that's the timeline in the next couple months. Well, thanks everyone for attending this. We'll process the recording, put it online. Feel free to share it with anyone else at a UCGIS member institution you think might be interested in this opportunity. And reach out to us separately online if you have any other questions that come up while you're thinking through your ideas.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you,
everyone. See you soon. Bye.